We're live.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the Global Counterterrorism Institute's Global Town Hall. This is a closed Microsoft Teams town hall designed as a strategic forum focused on population protection, predictive security, and resilience. To maintain structure, all audience questions should be submitted directly through Teams chat for moderated review later in today's session. We're honored to have you here. To officially begin, I'd like to introduce today's host, John. John serves as a strategic leader within the GCTI operational system, helping guide initiatives focused on innovation, organizational growth, and mission execution. Today, John will serve as your lead moderator, guiding us through key discussion on population protection, predictive security, and strategic resilience.
You're muted, John.
I'm sorry. I thought I sounded super good. Thank you, Eugenia. Joining me today is Eugenia Montiel-Asiti. She will be my co-host. Eugenia brings an international background in strategic communication, multicultural engagement, policy analysis, and strategic planning, with professional and academic experience spanning from Canada, the United States, Europe, Middle East, and Latin America. She plays an essential role in strategic communication, audience engagement, and operational coordination across GCTI initiative. Throughout today's events, Eugenia will help facilitate audience interaction, monitor team chats, questions, and support our global discussion. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the GCTI Global Town Hall on Population Protection and Health Security. Today's question is simple. How do we protect population when threats across public health, infrastructure, cyber system, and societal pressure increasingly converge? This is not a public webinar. This is a strategic forum.
As we begin, please submit in the Teams chat, what do you believe is the single greatest threat to population protection today?
Let me introduce our VIP keynote, and I'm honored to introduce him. This is retired Colonel David Eric Jones. David is a CEO and managing partner of Zafiri Corporation and brings more than 37 years of combined U.S. Army and Air Force experience in engineering, biosecurity, operational leadership, and enterprise risk management. Throughout his career, he has led initiatives across environmental health, emergency response, infrastructure risk, and mission-critical operation within both public and private sector environments. While in senior operational command roles, he oversaw a large-scale logistics and billion-dollar asset environments under a high-pressure condition. Today, he continues to advise organizations on operational resilience, governance, and strategic risk alignment, while pursuing advanced studies through the Global Counterterrorism Institute. Please join me in welcoming retired Colonel David Eric Jones.
Good afternoon, good evening, and thanks, John and Eugenia and Todd, for the opportunity to talk today. So basically, my briefing is going to describe how the system seems to be failing in real time. So essentially, we're entering a period where multiple systems are beginning to strain, and all at the same time. This isn't like a hypothetical problem or a conceptual problem. It's happening right in front of us in real time. So what we're watching is tension building around the globe, around energy choke points like the Straits of Hormuz. We're seeing shifts in production alignment, countries reevaluating long-standing relationships, and including signals coming out of the UAE at the moment. And individually, you might think these are independent events, but collectively, it represents something much larger in the world today. So while there are early indicators of fragmentation, in some systems, we assume other systems are stable, but collectively, something else is going on. And importantly, these pressures are no longer isolated to economics or geopolitics alone, and even recent concerns surrounding the Hunter virus illustrate the same thing. The issue is how tightly we are interconnected with modern systems, and how these modern systems, when they start to have individual stresses, now they reach across and stress each other. So to understand the stress, you've got to step back and look at the infrastructure that we've created and how tightly it's coupled. For example, energy for us today is not just an economic output. It's the operating system beneath all of our healthcare, our emergency response, our food distribution, and in fact, our digital infrastructure that we're carrying on as we speak. And then we can break it down into a smaller component and look at just diesel fuel as an example. So diesel fuel powers our global logistics, it powers backup systems, it supports hospitals, supply chains, and all continuity of operations. Even systems we think of as digital rely on it. Data centers, communications infrastructure, and emergency redundancy systems overwhelmingly depend upon backup fuel capacity. When that layer is constrained, the impact does not remain inside these energy markets, it propagates. Healthcare systems feel it, supply chains feel it, and the public confidence feels it. And because these systems are interconnected, their pressure in one domain rapidly transfers into a different domain. So yet we will still discuss these issues separately: energy, health, infrastructure, security, different conversations, different agencies, and different reporting structures. But in reality, when they fail together. So let's walk through at least just one plausible scenario. It's not extreme, it's not unlikely, just plausible. So when we have tightening fuel supply conditions, particularly diesel, driven by geopolitical disruption, can constrain refined capacity. At the same time, demand remains constant, or it even increases. Pressure begins to appear in logistics first, in our transportation systems. Delivery timelines begin to stretch out and operating costs rise. Healthcare systems begin to feel it next. Delayed medical supply chains, reduced operational flexibility, increase in strain in emergency services. And at the same time, public uncertainty grows. Information gaps begin to emerge, and misinformation fills whatever the voids are. Confidence erodes. Now I'll layer this infrastructure stress into a few other things. Backup systems become more heavily relied upon. Emergency redundancy or energy redundancy becomes more critical, and operational margins shrink. Then add biological sensitivity into the environment. Again, not a catastrophe, not alarm, not even limited health events become more difficult, but even more limited health events become more difficult to manage when layered onto already strained infrastructure, supply chains, and public communication systems. And this is how systematic stress begins to compound. Not through one individual catastrophic event, but through multiple moderate pressures interacting simultaneously. So the question becomes, at what point does the system recognize this as a crisis? And the answer is late. Because each domain is tracking down its own signals, but very few are integrating those signals, and that's actually the crux of the issue. So we're not lacking data, but we're not even lacking expertise within each individual system, but we are lacking integration across systems. Public health systems detect impact after it emerges. Infrastructure systems respond to localized stress. Intelligence systems identify signals, but within their own domain boundaries. Policy systems act once consequences become visible, usually on the evening news, or now in a FaceTime meme. Each system functions, but they function independently. And the result is delayed recognition of converging risk. We do not experience failure as a single event. We experience it as a simultaneous degradation across systems. Healthcare disruption, supply chain instability, infrastructure strain, public confidence erosion, and all emerging from the same underlying conditions, each one recognized a little bit too late. What you're seeing is not isolated failure, it's systemic failure under conditions of interdependence. At scale, low process maturity and latent risk do not really degrade performance, they compound this failure. So what makes this more challenging is the speed in which conditions are changing, especially today. Energy markets shift, geopolitical alignments evolve, infrastructure demands are increasing, particularly within the growth of digital systems and energy-intensive systems operations. Consider the amount of energy AI consumes. At the same time, public trust is becoming more fragile. Things we've been used to for the past 50 years, 70 years are changing quickly. Institutional response cycles have not adopted. The speed of disruption exceeds the speed of coordination, and that gap continues to widen. So the question is not whether these signals exist. They do. The question is, why are we still seeing them as separate problems? Because the system was never designed to see them together.
Thank you, David. David has outlined the warning. The question now becomes, if fragmented systems create delayed crisis recognition, what would be a predictive framework designed to identify convergence actually looks like? And before our panel of questions and so on, it is my privilege to introduce Todd Moore-Price. Dr. Todd Moore-Price, MBA, PhD, is a retired U.S. Army veteran, a global security strategist, a co-founder and president of the Global Counterterrorism Institute. With more than 2 decades of experience in counterterrorism, cybersecurity, international security strategy, and institutional development, Dr. Price has dedicated his career to advancing practical solutions to evolving global threats. He serves as program owner for GCTI Strategic Initiative and oversees accredited educational pathways in partnership with Paris Graduate School. Dr. Price is also the founder of DTM Technologies Incorporated, where he leads development of the dynamic threat mitigation model. As an architect of DTM and Aegis, his work focuses on predictive governance, strategic foresights, and execution layer innovation. Today, Dr. Price will provide an exclusive strategic demonstration. Over to you.
John, thank you. I appreciate that introduction. And David, thank you too for your keynote this morning. And David just created what I call the tension that we cannot afford to ignore. And he talked about healthcare with healthcare pressure, infrastructure strain, cyber instability, logistics disruptions, and public trust erosion. And that's not as isolated problems. And exactly, they are pressures that build simultaneously. Now, in simple terms, one problem starts creating other problems. And David showed us the warning. And so now I'm going to show you the model. And what do I mean model? Well, the DTM, the dynamic threat mitigation, is our predictive model. It's not simply just a dashboard. It measures whether separate pressures are remaining isolated or beginning to compound. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by the DTM? So the DTM is 7 functions where each of those functions list variables, and it derives a terrorism total risk score. That's the overall model threat output scaled from 0 to 100. And that model, that mathematical model, was developed around these functions that represent social economic status, things like poverty, income inequality, political instability, corruption, weak institutions, ideological extremism, religious extremism, political extremism, social disenfranchisement, which is marginalization and exclusion, identity suppression, and then lack of education, literacy rates, critical thinking, and 2 more, psychosocial factors, because in any counterterrorism or conflict region, there's always trauma and there's identity crises. And those are usually based on grievances, mental stressors, or group psychology. And then there's external influence, which are measures outside that could affect radicalization. Could be foreign funding, could be proxy war, So all of those things make up the DTM model. And for logic that is built into it, there is artificial intelligence. It evaluates operational strain, asset fatigue, supply chain friction, threat activities, and public trust sensitivity. And so in layman's terms, it's the DTMS, how much pressure is building, where, how fast, and could one problem begin triggering another? And so the simple thing is DTM helps us see the small problems before they become bigger disruptions. And so my analogy, the DTM is like weather forecasting for systems. One storm cloud may matter, it may not matter, but when multiple pressures combine, storms form. And so the core of it is that DTM identifies instability. And that goes along with AEGIS, our analytical engine for global intelligence and strategy, which is built in governance and commit time gatekeeping. And because prediction alone is not enough, and we don't always go by prediction. And that is why AEGIS exists. AEGIS is our governance architecture. So where the DTM is the warning light, like you have on your car, AEGIS is the driver. That's the simple way of putting it. And at the center of AEGIS is commit time gatekeeping. And so this means governance does not happen after decisions fail. AEGIS creates checkpoints before critical actions become outcomes. In layman's terms, before any major decision moves forward, AEGIS will ask, does this increase instability? Does this preserve trust? Does this protect critical systems? And AEGIS governs decisions before unstable reactions become larger failures. So at the core, the DTM identifies pressures and AEGIS governs outcomes. And so with that, I have some scenarios that I'd like to start with and some demonstrations. And before I begin those, if you look at it, our entire ecosystem is based on, with the DTM and AEGIS, is based on core doctrine. And that doctrine is, it's a foundation for understanding strategic competition, deterrence, escalation sovereignty, and long-range geopolitical risk. And that built into DTM was the 25 immutable laws of geopolitical strategy, along with an analytical layer that we develop in algorithms in the mathematical model. And so the predictive analytical model examines the interacting drivers across instability of social, political, ideological, and external influence environments. And then there's the operational. That third layer in our trilogy of the strategy series is the intelligence architecture that translates doctrine and modeling into structured warning, mitigation, planning, and institutional results. Now, in AEGIS or in DTM itself, the DTM is, like I said, it's not just a dashboard, it's an actual platform, and it's a system of intelligence-driven adaptive governance. And within the system, there is different briefs that we can show. There's an investor brief if you're in the investment series. If you, if you're in this scenario right now, in this town hall, the health security vertical and the early biological signal, well, the first scenario is a lower level biological signal. And in the volatility to mitigation stress profile, we look at these different scenarios, and what David was talking about, a small rise in an illness may seem manageable, but the DTM is going to ask, well, could this affect schools? Could it affect healthcare staff? Could it affect community readiness or public communications? And sometimes the earliest warning signs are the quietest. And so AEGIS, what does leadership do? Well, AEGIS increases its monitoring it prepares the communications, and it strengthens the readiness quietly while protecting continuity early. So again, the DTM says, pay attention, and AEGIS says, prepare. And so in the event, the first event, which was a increase in chickenpox in the Southeast, I don't know if many of you remembered a few months back in Texas, there was a chickenpox outbreak. And it did affect a bunch of different things like healthcare staffing. It affected the schools and community readiness. And it mainly, after we did the strategic summary, we looked at the impact, the compounding effects, and the strategic implications. And what it said was, there's going to be a sharp spike in these operational frictions because communities were not set up for these illnesses and these outbreaks within the compounding effects, meaning, yeah, somebody got chickenpox, but how is that affecting the schools? Parents aren't letting their kids go to school now. There's bigger pressures that are building in the background. And so we looked at, the analysis of it, and it gave an instability index of 56. Why? Well, in the stress variables, it looked at operational load strain, asset fatigue, and what that means is, did the healthcare systems, cybersecurity systems in the hospital, because our adversaries look for these events, and they will piggyback off of them and increase misinformation. That is the number one cause of narrative strategies in this new narrative warfare that we see right now. Our enemies, our adversaries, are pushing more information that leads to disinformation, to incorrect assumption. And so that affected not just healthcare, but it affected supply chain. It affected our adversaries' increase with threat activity, and that affected the cyber systems in Texas. It also affected, we did this earlier demo in the previous town hall, it affected the grid system, the electrical grid system in Texas. And it was a load, there was some load shedding that had to happen from results of that event. And we looked at the top compounding drivers, which were threat activity and adversary. Those were the number one things, people pushing misinformation out about the event and the chickenpox outbreak. And that helped lower public confidence because no one knew what really was going on until they started looking at what mitigations were. And we came up with several different rank mitigations that needed to happen, which was enhanced monitoring for these threats. And the CDC, NAST, and a few other agencies saw an increase, like the NSA did, of adversary infiltration in systems, misinformation on public sources, and in the media. And so the DTM itself provides us with these mitigations in order of severity, and it provides us in governance with the decision threshold. And some of that was to escalate the executive incident posture, which helped agencies get together to inform the public of the exact issues that were actually affecting people. And the outbreak was much smaller than people actually anticipated and thought it was. So things quieted down a lot quicker. And so that was the way that our DTM model helped with the scenario. And the next one that I went with was, it was the second biological event David talked about, the hantavirus. And that was a signal. What do I mean by signal? Well, from that signal, those things that happened in the initial event, we moved to convergence. And what do I mean by convergence? Well, convergence means multiple problems start colliding at the same time. And so when we looked at this hantavirus, it was a maritime cluster that was happening aboard that cruise ship. The This is no longer just an illness, right? Hantavirus is an illness. But what is the conversion? When I say conversion for this, well, the illness, it's not just an illness. The illness is starting to affect ports, and ports affect logistics, and logistics affects healthcare, and healthcare affects trust. The healthcare system is the #1 trust system in the world. And if the healthcare system is not working correctly, we lose trust in institutions. That is the #1 place we start with is healthcare. So the virus itself may be the trigger, but the destruction spreads through the systems around it. And well, these questions start happening. Can the port function? Can quarantine scale? Can supplies move? And can trust remain stable? And this is where governance becomes critical, right? Governance will segment systems. It'll provide and protect continuity. Governance governs communication. It preserves trust. And it prevents fear from creating larger instability. So the DTM in this biological event, it rated it a little bit more severe, 75 out of 100. You know, the problem is spread. And that's what we do understand. There's operational load strain, asset fatigue, and the convergence and the effects of that were obvious because it went on a world stage. The World Health Organization got involved and systems were segmented again because different agencies, different countries, they have different protocols in place for how they deal with these things. Some do not have very good protocols at all. They just don't. What did they do? They left the ship off the coast for a few days and did nothing. And people were dead. Right? Well, that convergence automatically shut down their port. Nothing was happening. And so we looked at the compounding effects, and there was what's called a friction confidence feedback loop. And that's driven, it's driven synergy between operational load strain and public confidence. That was the number one thing that, first of all, many people didn't even understand what the hantavirus was. It's just mouse droppings, and it's ingesting those. No different than a buildup of pigeon poop that is toxic. Anywhere you have pigeon shit building up, it's toxic to humans. Excuse my French. And then, we looked at these stress variables in our DTM model, and we looked at the compounding drivers. And obviously, there was operational load strain because of the port shutting down. There was public confidence right away because no one knew what to do or what was going on. And then that affected the supply chain, especially in South Africa. And so we looked at the mitigations, and our DTM model ranks the mitigations by preventing, communicating, continuity, containment, and then recovery, which is what's happening now, how many weeks after. And this is what could have been done ahead of time, that we're working with the UN now to show them these ranked mitigations and the ability to dynamically mitigate threat, which is you can be predictive as much as possible, but if you don't understand the governance behind it or the threat mitigation, if you don't know how to identify risks, there's no solution, right? When someone says, don't bring me a problem, but also bring me a solution, well, this is what the DTM does. And then AEGIS, well, in layman's term, AEGIS provides the governance and commit time gatekeeping so that the wrong decisions are never made, right? The wrong decisions are never made. So, what we have seen so far from these two incidents are that the DTM, well, for one, in the first biological event, it was early signal from the chickenpox outbreak. In the second biological event, it was system collision. And so the DTM identified the instability in those both, and then AEGIS governs the decisions before they become apparent. Now, opening Aegis. This is the second part. This is the governance layer and the intelligence console for the predictive security architecture series that I have been posting and publishing recently. We have a new book out that launched today, which is Security Architecture Frameworks, that the DTM and Aegis are part of this eco-series. Book 2 is out. The first book was 25 Immutable Laws of Geopolitical Strategy. Second book, Security Architecture Frameworks, was published this morning. And you can see the console, you can see the cover of it. And it is available. We'll begin posting the link for that. Right now, it's only available on Kindle, but it should be available, and it has its own website. So going back to Aegis, the last part of this, what I wanted to look at was the doctrine. The core doctrine that is embedded in this architectural system is that Aegis governs these decisions that DTM identifies early, right? Being able, what my saying is pre-prior planning prevents piss poor performance. That's the 7 P's of success. And so being able to get things prepared ahead of time, and look, since 9/11, we have focused on anti-terrorism, which is a defensive posture after events. And agencies normally, they just look at things after that. And no one wants to look at the root causes of these issues like social economic status, political instability, ideological extremism. And where David in his keynote, he showed us these warning signals. The DTM showed us the connections. And now Aegis, and it governs those decisions that shape what happens next, right? And in a 72-hour forecast, we can look at the outlook of events in these events when they happen, and we can look at a most likely scenario, right? We can look at what escalation could trigger based on all of the data that's coming in. So this is scientifically and data backed. It's not just someone's perspective. And yes, the perspectives are always the last human in the loop decision that it's called, because no AI should ever be allowed to make a decision without approval from a human. That's a 2-person rule. Even if you're using AI, there should be no platform, system, or application that does not have a human making the final decision, period. If not, this is why you see the 1,300 plus DOJ investigations happening with AI around the globe right now. And this is what you will see. You won't see that from our organization, because our architectural series, it's built long-term. It's also built for training. We have different training courses available in the systems, whether they're subscription model or whether they're coursework, that you can each learn how to operate these systems in real time. And we use live data in our system. And we use live data sources, whether it's intelligence reports from people on the ground, whether it's vulnerability databases, sanctions list from the UN, CISA, known vulnerabilities, the global terrorism database, and different commercial off-the-shelf stuff. Like we also get the World Health Organization data and the IMF data. So we know that the data is ingested. It's already cleansed. It's the accuracy of the platforms itself. When we look at our synthetic intelligence, we have a 98% model accuracy for all of the output that is coming out of either the DTM or Aegis. And we look at our training data points. They're always looked at. We looked at anomalies, and our systems do its own red teaming. We have continuous automated red teaming inside our systems, checking for vulnerabilities daily. We launch exercises nonstop to check. And then for the industry, depending on your subscription model or whether you're at an enterprise level, we add post-quantum encryption. meaning we can help you through the transition that's happening that needs to be done. And whether those are NSA keys, CNSA ready, whether they're FIPS keys, all of the different standards that are out there, we're already ingested, we're already active, we can connect these keys and make sure that you're transition ready from this past encryption service to the next encryption service. Because none of the old stuff is going away. It's just another layer, just like multi-factor authentication. And at some point, it'll only be PQC, but that's a long time. So with that, John, I turn it back over to you, and that's what I have for now. You enjoyed the demonstration.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. All right. So we just met our first panelist, which is Dr. Price. We met the second panelist, which was retired Colonel David. Now, let me introduce you Dr. Hunter Taylor, who completed his master and doctorate of philosophy in history of science and medicine at the University of Oxford. He has moved his research to the subject of emergency preparation and response to disaster, pandemic, and terror attacks, in addition to earlier work on the development of public health and its relationship to national security in Britain. He is originally from Eastern Ontario in Canada and has been associated with GCTI for the last 2 years. We are also honored to welcome Dr. Sharif Uddin Hamed Rana, founder and president of the World Talent Economy Forum Institute, the WTEFI. Dr. Rana is an internationally recognized academic. He's a researcher and an innovation leader whose work focuses on the intersection of human capital, technology, innovation, and global development. Through the WTEFI, he has built an international platform connecting academia, industry, and policy maker to advance collaboration in areas such as AI, smart governance, sustainability, and digital transformation. In addition to his institutional leadership, he has contributed scholarly work on technocracy and how expert knowledge can improve decision-making and public policies in a rapidly changing world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sharif Uddin Hamed Rana.
He's not here yet.
He's not here yet.
No, neither is Dr. Hunter. So I think what we should do is pause here for a few minutes and get them on the call to see where they're at. I know they were here this morning, but they're not here right now. Not sure why. Let's see. He is on the wrong side of the call, I believe. He should be inside here.
For those who watch right now, please give us 2 minutes so we can figure this technology out. Right?
Yeah, I think Dr. Hunter is on. He should be in the link that is in the chat. But I don't think he's inside. Someone want to send him the inside link here? He should have got it in his email earlier. Let me double check here real quick. Calendar. Dr. Hunter and Dr. Sharif, if you look at the calendar in Teams, you should see joining the Teams meeting at 9 a.m. You should see the link there.
So what's going to follow for the one who are watching right now, what we're going to go through is formal question where the panelists will actually answer those questions, and we'll put their two cents into it as well, based on their knowledge, studies, and what they have known for the past few years.
Okay, in the Q&A panel chat, I put the inside link for Dr. Hunter and Dr. Sharif to join. Not sure why they've got the outside link. He says he's trying. Okay.
Technology is perfect when it works perfectly.
Okay. We'll get there.
Yeah, for sure.
While they're coming in, I think one of the things that's important to note, when Todd was describing what was going on with the hantavirus, one of the things is it's not necessarily what's real, it's what people perceive as real. So if you hear hantavirus on the news and you're thinking about going on a cruise, or you're already on a cruise, or you have tickets to a cruise, all of a sudden you become elevated. So, if you try to think about, how that impacts and ripples throughout the population, that's a public confidence signal. If you're looking at fuel supplies and things like that in healthcare, you go, how does it affect me as a person? Well, think about Meals on Wheels. Think about all the people who are involved with the personal care industry, personal assistants. I think I read this morning there's about 500,000 people employed in the state of New York alone in the personal care industry. And what does that mean? That means people who go out, buy groceries and things like that, and are somehow being subsidized through various different, federal or state programs or insurance policies, et cetera. Well, that cost of fuel, when they were thinking about doing that work last year, they did it based on certain fuel calculations, for example. And when the fuel price goes up, that impacts them. So how many people will want to do that work? Or will they do less trips? They'll, et cetera. So all of these like little things contribute to the fact. So if people start not getting fed or not getting their medicine on time and things like that, now that starts to have an impact on the healthcare system. And so you can kind of see how lots of little things begin to add up as a result of something happening on the other side of the world. And I think years ago, I think maybe 20 years ago, potentially, there was a story about, the making of a t-shirt and how many countries a t-shirt goes through before it comes into your hands. I don't remember the exact number, but I do remember being, it was incredible how many places a t-shirt makes a stop before it arrives in your hands at the retail store.
And it's a cycle as well, right? One, it's a domino effect. One follows, the other one follows, and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
Very interesting. We will get back soon. I'm convinced of it.
All right, so they're on their way. I'm not sure where Dr. Sharif is. He may be having technical issues in Bangladesh. We can move on with the panel questions, I guess, as best we can. David?
Sure, I'm open.
We're waiting on Dr. Hunter. He should be here any second. Not sure why he is not able to join this meeting.
Okay, well, let's go with the first question then. So let's begin with, what is the single greatest threat to population protection over the next 5 years? In your own words.
David, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think one of the single greatest threats is actually fear psychology, because as soon as anything comes up, the smallest thing, it gets amplified. There was a report over the weekend that, for example, going back to the hantavirus again, over 100,000 sources reported the same story within just hours. So the number of sources that were reporting back on an incident far exceeded the actual level of the threat. So as soon as people become escalated, we all know that under stress we make decisions that maybe we shouldn't be making. And so just the amplification of problems above and beyond where they need to be escalated to contributes further to making the problem worse. So I would say our biggest threat is learning how to become more educated and to question things, even if they need to be questioned quickly, at least raising that question. I heard this. Is it true? even down to the point where you see something on LinkedIn, you see something on Facebook, you hear something from your neighbor on the phone. Before you go out and you repeat that thing, go look it up and see if it's true or not.
This fear is
I agree.
based also out of a history, right? I mean, we just went through COVID for 5 years ago, where people actually got enclosed for a little while. So I guess the fear is from history, it's from the past.
Yeah. I think for me, the single greatest threat is not just necessarily one event. It's more often that, there's the growing likelihood that separate pressures like health disruptions, cyber instability, logistics breakdowns, even in different media outlets, right? They begin interacting faster than the institutions are prepared to recognize or even coordinate. And that kills public trust right away because no one knows what to believe. And so we use the DTM in these scenarios because modern disruption, well, it rarely stays isolated. And the real danger is delayed recognition of a connected crisis and, that governance that leadership needs to make decisions, well, they become fragmented even before the system, it starts failing. And as soon as there is different misinformation that leads to disinformation, that just kills public confidence and trust because no one knows what to do. So that's my take.
Very good. Let's keep going. And I mean, we can return with when our two other panelists will come back, we can return to those questions and ask them their opinion. But let's go with the panel question number 2. How should a government, education systems, and private institution better prepare for public health and biosecurity crisis? Over to you, Todd.
Say the first part again.
Oh, sorry. How should the government, education system, and private institution better prepare for public health and biosecurity crises?
So that, to me, is preparation. Like I said, pre-prior planning prevents piss poor performance. And preparation begins by recognizing that all of these healthcare, infrastructure, communication, governance, well, they need to interact. And I'm sorry, but the one thing that I know about geopolitical instability is that agencies vie and fight every year, every budget cycle for their piece of the pie. And if they say that they can't do something, it's because they're not funded. And instead of, finding a solution, which is to interact with the other agencies, yeah, they create joint terrorism task force and stuff like that, but that's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about prior communications and prior governance. It means that these institutions need to align better on decision making and that they need to interact a lot quicker than after some incident happens. And you do that by being proactive, not necessarily using predictive forecasting, but predictive forecasting, what if scenarios, what if these happen? Those are exactly what you should train for. Not on the fly decisions that we need to change things, because that could be the wrong decision, like we saw in COVID. And I'm glad you used the COVID as an example. I think there were 12 countries that did not allow those COVID shots to enter their country at all because they didn't believe in what was going on, because they lost that public trust and confidence. There were also assassinations of some of those leaders that happened during that time. 12 to be exact, whether they were vice presidents or presidents. They didn't stay in power because the effects of fear and misinformation caused the opposition in those countries to say, hey, wait a minute. Why are you saying these things didn't happen? They are happening, and it's real. We have people dying daily. And so it shouldn't take these incidences.
I think another consideration is in terms of, clearly one thing is interesting is when everything is calm, we talk about the importance of diversity and differences of thought and different cultures and all of this and how we should get along. But then suddenly, like I was mentioning a few minutes ago, when things become under stress, people start making different decisions. So during COVID, as the example, the classic example, probably at least of our current life, is everything became homogenized with COVID. There was like a complete lack of diversity, in approach, and there was a lack of acceptance that there might be a diverse way of dealing with the problem. And we do have a lot of different cultures, just in the United States, but all over the planet. And to Todd's point about some countries not having the vaccine come in, people had different practices. I mean, now, like, it's almost like, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, or fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Now we know that there's a broad perspective on how to handle, or how we're going to handle, health crises. So what there should be going on is like a little bit of communication for what worked and what didn't work, and then understanding that the next health crisis that comes down the road is going to again result in a diverse response. And instead of trying to shut people down who have a different opinion than the mainstream opinion, so to speak, we should be talking to them and understanding what the risks are and things like that, instead of talking at them. I mean, we have to remember that people like Copernicus and others were destroyed, in their lifetime, because they said that the sun goes, or the earth goes around the sun, not the sun goes around the earth. And at some time, everybody was in agreement that the world was flat, and that if you sailed too far, you'd go off the edge. And we all know that Columbus didn't go off the edge. Even though he didn't come into the Indies that he thought he did, he still didn't go off the edge of the world, and it discovered a new world. So it's just, there's a lot of different things going on out there that we should be considered. In crisis, we should still respect diversity and not force things to be a certain way that the collective thinks this should be.
I'm curious because we talked about here, and the question goes to both of you. We're talking about government, educational system, private institution, but should the public be prepared as well? Like, should you be prepared at home? And if so, how?
Well, for sure. I mean, you need to educate yourself on what different things are, but you know what? It goes back to, the basic fundamentals of public health. Wash your hands, keep your food clean and safe. All the normal things that you would do. Try to eat a well-balanced diet. Make sure that in terms of supplies, we know that in the past, a lot of, when we know even during hurricanes that you need to have water stocked up if you live in hurricane prone areas, like for example, Florida. Most people in Florida have cases and cases of bottled water just in case. You do need to have a certain amount of backup supplies that are on your own to maintain that stuff. So yes, in terms of preparations, you should have some basic dry goods. You should have your paper supplies backed up. You need to have your backup batteries, your water, all of this. This stuff pertains, and everybody has a different level of economic threshold that they can, or even space that they can store the stuff in. But no matter where you are, at whatever level that you can prepare, you need to have a plan. And if you can't do it alone, which a lot of people cannot, you need to talk to your neighbors and figure out like what is their plan. And you need to have a coordinated plan if you're on your own, et cetera, or of less economic means. And we should all be, if you have means, you should be spending a little bit of your time helping people without means to get themselves prepared to a point where they can get through it. Because the reality is, if you don't do that, those people who don't have means to prepare are suddenly going to become, very threatened, and their behavior is not going to be what it is when you're going for a walk in the park on a typical afternoon at 4 o'clock once the crisis hits. So it's in all of our best interest to help each other.
Awesome. Yeah, we've seen this during the COVID again, for toilet paper as an example, right? People were raging and there was an outsource of paper toilet. But it's a silly example, but that's true, right? People
It's the truth.
lost their mind over toilet paper.
Except
Right?
for the Europeans.
The bidet.
Exactly. They use the bidet. They don't use toilet paper.
Perfect. Let's go for question number 3. What role should predictive technology, AI governance, strategic intelligence play in the protecting human population?
I'll let Todd jump in on this. He's the,
Okay.
oh, you want me to jump in on? I'm happy to go first, but I just went.
Yeah. No, go ahead. You can go first.
Well, I think that, that AI is an excellent tool, and AI is a good like office companion, but it shouldn't be the governing. The AI needs to have even more governing than a human does, because an AI, first of all, it acts like much more quickly than a human does, and it acts in a purely binary fashion. A human stalls and goes, oh, I don't know. They're ambivalent before they make a decision. The AI just keeps passing the decision and passing the decision and passing the decision at
Right.
light speed. Okay, and you need to have guardrails up so that the AI has to stop, okay, before it makes the next decision. Because to the AI, the decision is quote unquote logical. All
It's
right.
binary,
It's
yeah.
just binary and logical. And that's why it's very important to have lots of speed bumps, guardrails, whatever you want to call them, to cause the AI to stop. However, it's an excellent tool, because even though we go to a meeting and we say, the leader usually will stand up and go, I just want everybody to know there's no stupid questions. And everybody in the room knows there's stupid questions, okay? Or at least that they feel like there might be a stupid question and they feel like they don't want to ask the question. You can at least have a conversation with the AI, and you can ask as many stupid questions as you want. And the AI is not going to feel any differently about you, and it's not going to make you feel not that smart, and it's not going to affect your promotion or whatever the XYZ thing is. You can have those conversations with the AI that you might not be able to have with a person. And so it's valuable to help you learn things that you might be uncomfortable talking to about somebody else. However, it should never, ever, as Todd talked about in his Aegis demo, it should never, ever be the controlling force. It always needs to go to a human to make that decision, especially the most critical ones. Always, always.
We've seen that recently in Palantir's targeting acquisition system using AI that mistakenly targeted this girl's school next door to the target, and how off they were using. And so that's just one example. To me, predictive systems, it should improve the visibility, but not replace the leadership. It just should never replace leadership. And so this is a good time for me to do the formal public apology we did a test this last weekend, and AI took over and emailed thousands and thousands of the same email over and over again. And it should never have done that. But there was AI drift, and that drift caused a super agent that was actually monitoring a system that sends emails, and it gained access to it, and it started sending the same email out over and over and over again. I believe 81 times until we were able to shut it down. And that was a internal incident. And so I am formally public apologizing, because I was the one that was doing that incident this weekend. And so if you received, I don't know, 81 emails on Saturday and 81 emails on Sunday, just multiply that by 2,000, multiply that again by 2 or 3 times that needed to go out, and that's why you received. Well, there were several thousand people that received several emails. And if you didn't, that means you have us blocked and you're found out. I just thought I'd put that out there. And that's okay. It was
Thanks,
a good
Todd.
spam example.
It's live and learn, and we're living in the age of trying to be more efficient,
Yes.
have AI do what we consider to be administrative functions. But you can see, I mean, even for a small organization like ours, how quickly you can propagate, an error. And, I when I saw the article today about AI drift, on LinkedIn, that's why I tagged you on it. If anybody wants to search on it, search AI drift. It's a very important thing to understand. And there's a big difference, so hallucinations is what we always talk about AI, that, it might make a mistake or give you the wrong information. Well, that's probably something that you can catch relatively quickly is the
Right.
hallucination. But the drift is the AI sort of, I mean, I don't want to say it like in a human way, but it is somewhat true because it is intelligence. It's just artificial, but it just
Yeah.
begins to undermine your intent. All right. Like literally, it undermines your intent. Just like somebody in your office that doesn't like you, it just goes ahead and starts doing stuff. And you don't even know until it's too late.
Yeah. And I found that out the hard way. What happens is, yes, that was convergence. What we were building and the intent behind it escalated with convergence because the commit time gate that Aegis has, it did not, didn't catch it. And so that lesson is now an incident response report that we are collecting the data on to be able to provide NIST or some of the AI communities to show them, hey, if you're building apps, that's great, but you still should not allow any AI super agents to manage your apps, period. You still need the governance there, and you can't just bolt governance on. It has to be built in synthetically, and it has to be monitored consistently across your ecosystem, whatever your applications are. And we use multiple apps in our ecosystem with multiple governance responsibilities and a system of record. And well, I think that's the part that people miss. You can have all these things in place, but if you're not reporting them as lesson learned, you're never going to know. You're never going to break that cycle. And that's why there are so many lawsuits and investigations for AI companies right now.
John,
So,
now might be a good time because technology enabled Dr. Hunter to finally slide back in for us.
yeah,
So if you can go back to those first couple of questions, especially the one about what does he perceive to be the, most likely threat, and what was your very first question? I thought that was interesting. I love to hear his response.
Sure. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Hunter. The first question was, what is the single greatest threat to population protection over the next 5 years?
Um, I kind of support what David had to say in that the possibility of public fear is one of the biggest issues on any of these things because the understanding of some of these problems is not very profound. I mean, I know what hantavirus is, and my understanding of what happened in some of that is that it's a condition that's spread by rodent feces and rodent bites. And apparently, one of the people on the cruise ship was an obsessive birder who decided to crawl through a garbage dump to get pictures. That's a good way to get hantavirus. Now, if you are determined to crawl through garbage dumps, then yes, you could get hantavirus, but honestly, you're trying at that point.
Mhm.
It's like deciding to, do an overland trip through Central Africa without any kind of protection against malaria. You're going to get it. I had to do some presentations recently on the history of expeditions to the source of the Nile. And it's worth remembering that John Henning Speke and Richard Burton were literally carried in hammocks by their porters to get there because they were so fantastically sick, because they didn't have enough quinine. I would say another thing that is worth considering, though, is because we seem to be experiencing more frequent natural events like hurricanes, that may be something both worth considering and potentially preparing for, because we've seen the aftermath of bad ones. I mean, Katrina was a systemic failure on multiple levels. a failure of preparation, a failure of the existing systems to react, a failure of local, state, federal government. One of the problems was that when FEMA was, which used to be an independent agency, was subsumed into the Homeland Security, their focus was pushed to anti-terrorism when traditionally they had dealt with things like disasters. And they had done that fairly successfully in the past. All of a sudden, their entire orientation was changed to something that was not typically within their expertise, and also their relationship to the government itself and the existing hierarchy changed completely. Before, the head of FEMA was a cabinet level position. All of a sudden, it was subsumed into Homeland Security. The person who was the head of FEMA didn't have the same access in order to ask for and get resources. And more generally, I mean, it's more as older infrastructure, which was built at an earlier era, the sense about what could and could not be expected starts to fail more. I mean, that the classic example is the World Trade Center, where when it was built, the countless documentaries I've seen, the architect said when we built it, the largest plane we had to think about was a 727. That wasn't what hit it. It's 767, much bigger aircraft. And I mean, he was clearly gutted by the thought that somehow they had failed, but you can only plan for the things you can foresee. Now and with something like Aegis, I think you've got the opportunity to test propositions that in the past you maybe wouldn't have been able to foresee. Think outside the box a little. What is the worst that can happen? Well, let's see what it is. What happens if we get something with 170 mile an hour wind, say, a storm? I mean, and what is the amount of building in an area? How much of the existing wetlands have been consumed for house building, which reduces surge capacity when you have water pushed inland? There are a lot of things that you can do to plan for it now, think about the possibilities, and we're going to have to.
Right. Well, actually, to add on to Dr. Hunter's conversation about the scenarios, so maybe 10 years ago, what you had to do was you had a thought about what might happen if, and then you said to yourself, yeah, it would be interesting to know, but like, I don't know how to code that, or I can't do that in a spreadsheet, or I don't know what the formula is, or I don't know, how to figure out the moment of inertia on I-beams and all this other technical stuff that you might have to know to solve a problem. However, now with the advent of AI, you can have a conversation with the AI about what might happen if, and start to throw stuff at it. And you don't have to know all this stuff because the AI knows a lot of stuff. And then once you can go through, and it can go through and at least give you a sense for what your scenario, how realistic it is, what it is, if it doesn't have enough information, who you might have to go see to confirm whatever it's saying. You can ask a dozen questions today that you couldn't ask 10 years ago, just based on your imagination. So you're not as limited today as you were. And I'm not saying you should use AI to give you the final answer. I'm just saying you should use the AI to help give you a clue as to whether or not you're barking up the wrong tree or not, and then take it to somebody who would, a human, who would know how to get to the answer. But that's a great point, Dr. Hunter, as far as you can only come up with a scenario or design for a scenario that you're aware of. And those you're not aware of, obviously you're not going to design for it.
Well, the other piece of that is people don't want to use history and the data from history to design these systems. Forecasting, the finance, they do it all the time. And you can forecast, they use weather and stuff like that. Yes, now you see more that they're putting emergency operations in place before tornadoes or hurricanes and stuff like that, declaring emergencies. They're getting healthcare people staffed correctly. And that's been the focus ever since Katrina, right? What a collapse that was. And so we still need to be a little bit more proactive and forecast and mitigate the risk before the escalation happens. Meaning there are indicators that happen and not focus on responding after attacks or after disasters, because that's actually what happens. And so, I mean, to me, there's early warning detection, and that even, you should even look at social economic shifts, just like we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz and what's happening right now. Online extremist rhetoric, behavioral anomalies, migration patterns are happening more so now of what's happening. I think was it yesterday there was another earthquake in Tehran. I'm not sure how extensive it was and the damage. But this is also in these incidents are creating financial irregularities. Yes, oil and the lack of oil and the shipment, that does create a cost increase, but it's also creating cyber intrusion signals that people are not picking up because our adversaries are our adversaries and they're designed to infiltrate our weaknesses. And our communication in America is one of our weaknesses. We're good at communicating, but we're not good at picking up signals. And that's the important part, is being able to detect rising instability like terrorism, like cyber warfare, insurgency, or mass violence before it happens. And you can only do that by using dynamic risk modeling, right? The DTM model, the 7-factor formula, and it covers all of the areas. And we look at these areas through the global security lens, which covers 10 different verticals. There are 10 different areas to look at in global security. The United Nations focuses on them. They have a counterterrorism branch. They have an environmental branch. They have a UNIFIL branch for security. They have a communication branch, and they use data sources too. They use the Horizon system, just like NATO uses the Maven system. Well, our organizations, we use DTM, and we use our ecosystem at small, medium, and business for enterprise and regular levels, because we look at threat likelihood, we look at vulnerability, impact severity, mitigation feasibility, resource availability, response time, and the number one key to anything in this globe is political and social acceptance. Without it, fear. Acceptance, right? Or I accept every person, place, or thing exactly as it's intended to be. I will never know peace. That's my response.
So just to continue on the same system, because we've been talking about organization and so on and so forth. So question for you, Dr. Hunter. I'm curious to hear your position on this based on what you've studied and did your research. But should we make our population less dependent from the government, therefore?
Tough one. I mean, it depends on what you mean. I mean, the thing about, I mean, the research that I've done in the past is that before you had comprehensive systems of public health, there was there's been a debate among historians about what caused the improvements in health in the 19th and early 20th century. And part of it appears to be economic, that gradually I hesitate to use this term, but stuff was trickling down. People were getting paid more, although it also has something to do with the rise of unions and collective bargaining. And there appear to have been improvements based on people's ability to simply buy more food. But there were also improvements that are grounded in practical public health legislation. Some of it being as basic as in enforcing very simple public health laws. You know, there was a time when you can put arsenic in candy because it made a very nice green. Mm-hmm. There was a time when before there were Pure Food and Drug Acts, people used to dilute milk. People used to add alum to flour, all kinds of awful things that are not allowed anymore. People used to be able to sell diseased meat. That's still sometimes an issue. So there are a whole host of basic interventions that you can take in, I would say, in order to enforce basic, I guess you could call it basic contractual obligations. If you're going to sell stuff, make sure that you're selling it properly. But another big part of public health was understanding what the health of the population was in the first place. And from that, understanding what intervention measures you could take. I mean, vaccination is something that began in Britain in the 19th century, thanks to Jenner's work on cowpox. It's like milkmaids didn't get smallpox because they got cowpox, which says a lot about cows. And the realization that by using cowpox, you could inoculate someone and it had the effect of making them immune to smallpox. Smallpox is one of the biggest issues, being one of the most destructive diseases of the period, along with tuberculosis. And over time, vaccination became mandatory. So that there are a whole range of interventions where, unless someone's doing it at a macro level, it doesn't work. So yeah, I think government does have enormous potential. The question is always where you draw the line, and that's something that we're going to keep debating forever.
No doubt. Directly related to that is when I was in junior high school, we all had to take home economics. Now, fortunately, within my household,
I did.
My parents taught me how to cook. All right. However, some households, they did not know how to cook. And related to when we talked earlier about what to do to prepare, I mean, if you don't know how to cook, all the food in your house, that all the dry goods set aside that you have, and you don't know what to do with them. Or to your point, when you have meat, if you procure meat and you can't have any idea for how to tell if it's been diseased or not, or, when it's going bad, how long it should be kept in the refrigerator, all of these sorts of like little nuances about handling food in your own house, you can create a big problem. And I know a lot of people, a lot of young people who literally eat out all the time, or the only things that they consume are processed type foods that come in a plastic wrapper. They don't know how to cook, and they struggle, even with coffee or eggs and things like that nowadays. And that, when I was younger, that was not really as big of an issue as it is today. So when you're talking about a role for government, government should look at what educational programs that we're providing to young people along the way. That is a great role for government, is the education piece.
Which is at time lacking.
Lack of education is one of the core pillars of a dysfunctional society, period. You can be smart, you can be intelligent, you can have good common sense, and that's good. But the lack of education is still one of the major indicators and functions of a society and how they grow, right? We've talked about that in Afghanistan. They stay in a Stone Age culture, but that's just part of their culture and society. And not having the understanding of that is why things did not go the way they were or did during those wars. Anyway, that was just my 2 cents.
I mean, a personal. Sorry, go ahead, Doctor.
Oh, sorry. I mean, at the beginning of the 20th century, that I know from my research, there were things like in Britain, there was the mother care movement, which also existed in France, where they were literally teaching, because infant mortality in 1904, infant mortality in Britain was 155 deaths per 1,000 children, which by modern standards is pretty high. And they were doing things like encouraging breastfeeding, which had been somewhat abandoned. And another part of it was things like teaching people how to cook properly. Now, admittedly, it was focused entirely on women. And some of the, I've read through the reports, and it's I mean, it's a reflection of the time, but women took a real beating. It's like, you're lousy mothers and you can't cook.
Right? Yep.
Said people who, and the wives reminded them, yeah, but my husband goes to the pub every night and comes home absolutely hammered. So, that was also an issue. Should, it was a bigger issue in the 19th century, but something as simple as how much were people drinking, the amount of the quantity of booze that people in Europe used to consume is mind-boggling by modern standards. Although part of it was also you couldn't drink the water. So, if you're drinking Guinness, you were fine. I knew people in graduate school who basically lived on Guinness and nothing else. They were Irish, but and they were somehow still alive, but it seemed to work.
Personally, I was a police officer, and I've seen so much how people depend on the system. That is from, talking to your neighbor, as simple as talking to your neighbor, the music is too loud, to changing a tire. You should know how to change a tire if you drive a car, right? So I think there's a dependence that's been created to the system to be needed to have a government to tax more or perhaps whatever that is. But we have a society that is in need to be guided on everything and told you can and cannot do this, because basics don't seem to be so basics anymore.
Yeah, I grew up in a newspaper publishing family, and I got to do things like cover court and interact with the police all the time where I grew up, and it is depressing that, for instance, I would bring the docket back to the newsroom, and the city editor would be like, "Who is that?" "Oh yeah, I used to see their parents in there all the time," and would start telling me stories. And he used to beat his wife until she sat on him, and that stopped it. That was literally one of the stories I heard. And so there's always going to be a chunk of the population that unfortunately invites oversight, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I guess the issue then becomes, what is the nature of the oversight, and can it be managed in a way that's more productive? Making sure that people have skills. If you put them in jail, making sure that they come out with something to do afterwards.
Right.
So not going as slow as the slowest person, but actually bring them, the slowest person, to a reasonable speed, I guess. All right. I have one more question, unless Todd, you want to add up something.
No, go ahead.
Okay. How do we ensure trust, ethic, sovereignty remain central while deploying advanced security frameworks? Whoever wants to start with. Eugenia.
Now let's get her take on this.
There are some Teams chat questions that I would also like to address. So
okay, yeah.
The panelists first.
We can do that too. I think we have one more question after this, but yeah, let's go ahead. I like this anonymous user first. Anonymous user.
So this one comes from Juan from Guatemala, and he's asking, this revolves around the conversation we've been having. Is centralized control or distributed coordination more effective in emergencies?
I'm going to say absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. But go ahead. Anybody else want to chime in?
Yes, more on in relation to emergency management, emergency response. So
that's a well proven model, is to have centralized planning and decentralized execution. And that's exactly what, we went from, when we migrated through out of FEMA into Homeland Security and all of the other, we completely reconfigured all the emergency management agencies across the entire United States after 9/11. Extensive amount of training has gone on over the past 25 years. Billions of dollars have been spent. However, now there is a centralized plan. Everybody follows the same game plan. Everybody follows the same architecture. It's all been agreed upon for that architecture. However, it's in the United States we have, which is unique when you talk about the sovereigns. Okay, we have the sovereign United States, and then we have the sovereign of each state. But then within each state, it funnels down to counties. All right. And then even in some circumstances, even over to the, gets segmented over to the city if the city is large enough within the county framework. All right. But everybody still uses the same structure. So if you came from Nebraska and you showed up in Delaware during a natural disaster and they told you where to go, you would show up and work. And you would know exactly what your responsibilities were, exactly who you were going to be reporting to, exactly what forms you were going to be filling out, et cetera, because it's already been designed. So that is absolutely critical. So, even for a small place like Honduras, there are, lots of little municipalities and other government entities out there. There should be, it's beneficial to have an agreed upon central architecture, okay, and then architecture should be replicated out into the district so that when people show up, they're all speaking the same emergency response language to each other. Even if it's in a different dialect, it's still an emergency response. It's the same language.
Agreed.
So what you're saying, David, just to paraphrase, so you're going into centralized control, but decentralized execution.
Centralized planning.
With
centralized planning, not centralized control. Centralized planning. Because if you try to control it all from the center, you at the center, depending on how big the emergency is, you don't really know what's going on for boots on the ground. And that's the importance of the planning and the training. And you spend, hours and months and weeks and years sometimes planning, okay, and training, okay, for that one event. And so that when that one emergency event kicks off, it's handled properly, and you can rely on the people who are out in the field to make the right decision because you've trained them to do what they need to do to get through.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
I talked to some people who are emergency services people. There's a guy in Maryland I talked to who does, among other things, he does hazmat training, and I've done EMT training twice now. And I talked to someone in Jordan, and also talked to my sister who just retired as an epidemiologist with the Canadian government with the National Epidemic Alert System. Yeah, the way things are handled best is the way the guy in Maryland put it is it's decentralized, but you have roles that you can just sort of slot people into when something comes up. So that this, if someone comes, you can put them there. And you also have the examples of like Katrina is a good example where there didn't appear to be control at any level. And so there was incredible confusion.
Well, thank you so much for all the panelists. I really appreciate this. So today's discussion reinforced one critical truth. Sorry?
There was one question in the chat that I wanted to respond to real quick. It says, could excessive dependence on AI weaken human creativity, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence? And the answer is yes. Absolutely.
They've already tested it.
Yes, they've already tested. One of the risks, one of the key primary risks that MIT, when they did their study of all the AI risks, the number one was cognitive outsourcing. If you start letting someone think for you, you don't have the capacity. That's why AI should never make any decisions without human in the loop decision making, period. And that is what's helpful. And so there are specific areas that weaken, right? Like generating ideas, writing content. And that's why education system is so against using AI, because you don't get the best ideas that come from human cognitive reason. You end up getting AI reason. And so they're opposed to it in some ways. In our organization, we don't want to stifle creativity, which is why we still do the thesis, and we know if it's AI generated. And we make sure that there's a lot more optimization or best fit outputs that could be inputted into that when we do our reviews of work, even before we publish them. So, well, if you can give me 5 perspectives that I can refine on my own, and you can do that, you're okay. But if you say AI to think for you, that's not okay. That's my assumption.
Thank you so much to all of you. So the critical truth I was trying to mention here is the future of security belongs not simply to those who act, but those to anticipate, therefore to prepare.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.
Stay informed, stay prepared, stay strategic. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time today.